I guess I'll just start from the top in case anyone is watching this thing in the beginning. Hang on. Oh man, I misspelled it. I fucking hate Emacs sometimes. Twitch TV. There we go. Alright, I guess I'll just give people a chance to join before I start going through it. Things are pretty different from yesterday. Some of the actual layout code looks nearly identical, but the data structures and the overall strategy and philosophy is completely different. But I think much better for it. It means that I can actually get away with less fragile stuff and still have it be, you know, very integrated into Emacs workflows that don't necessarily involve just this window manager. I think I'll wait for Tom to join before I start describing. I think he kind of knew the sort of the design issues I was butting my head against yesterday, so it would be useful to sort of address them just so I don't feel like I'm talking into the void. mean, for people that don't even know what the purpose of this is, I guess I can go over like what I'm actually trying to accomplish, and I suppose have accomplished. Um, but basically, Emacs. I mean, you can say that its approach to window management is already tiling, but it's very static. It's based on, I guess, a fairly classic approach based on hierarchical, horizontal, and vertical splits. It does have cyclic window ordering, so you can sort of traverse windows not just in the split hierarchy, but based on a cyclic window ordering. But still, I always found at least that it's very hard to keep track of your windows in Emacs because various functions want to open windows, all kinds of stuff like that. So I actually sort of in the Linux window manager world, I really prefer what are called dynamic tiling window managers. And the idea there is that the windows are basically just a list. And the only thing really structured about the list is that the very first element has pride of place. It's like the master window. But beyond that, it's just a flat list. So it's very easy to manage. There's just a flat list. And then, in order to actually display that list, you have various layout modes. And those layout modes, in order to display things, may end up using vertical and horizontal splits in some recursive fashion to actually lay things out. But the point is, your mental model and how you interact with the windows has nothing to do with, with how things are laid out. That's purely a side effect. So the nice thing about that is, let's see, like I basically have a bunch of keys bound. You can see the key bindings down here for the defaults. For example, I have Control plus pushes a new window on the stack. In the current layout mode, that is push it in the bottom of the right column. I can also pop it, which just kills it. If I want to kill a window inside the stack, I can do that too. So for example, suppose I push a new window, and then I will kill this window here. Well, I guess let me show something so you can see it disappears. So this is showing messages, and I now do Control W, and it kills that window. So yeah, easy to push and pop. Oops, this just revealed a minor bug. Fortunately, it's pretty easy to recover. Let's see. But yeah, the bug you saw there is that so my column layout mode and row layout mode will basically put the first window in its own column, and then it will pour everything else into the second column. And eventually Emacs is just going to crap its pants and say, I can't keep splitting things, they're getting too small. So if you push too many things into one of these layouts, it will crap its pants, unfortunately. So I just need to make those modes more complete. But anyway, so mental model, flat list of things, kind of like a stack. Very easy to manipulate. And then you can switch between layout modes. Probably the two most useful layout modes that I found are this current one, which is sort of a general workflow productivity mode. You can have, your code open in one thing, and you can have these sort of auxiliary windows on the right. But then sometimes maybe I want to read this help window here in full screen, and I have a bunch of layout modes active now, but normally say you only have two layout modes. One is the stack column mode and the other one is the full screen mode. In that case, just Alt-Enter would cycle, essentially flip between the full screen mode and the stack columns mode. And because it's not actually deleting the windows, it's just laying out only the focused window, I can easily go back without losing my window list. So that's sort of the concept. Right now, just for testing, I have all the layouts I've designed in the master layout list, which means that when I press Alt-Enter, it actually cycles through 4 different modes. That's totally excessive. For day-to-day stuff, you probably only want 2 active at a given time, and then specialized bindings for other stuff. So let's see. Yeah, so let's just look at this. I have 4 windows open. This is the stack columns mode. By the way, in the echo area in the very bottom of the screen, I display status anytime there's a state change related to my window manager. So if I press Control Tab to cycle to the next window, you can see it says it's laying out using the stack columns mode, and it lists the numbered modes. You can see I'm currently in the help buffer, window 2, and you can see that it's active because of the square brackets. And so if I just cycle through them, you can see the focus cycle through. Now suppose I actually cycle through layout modes as well. That would be Alt-Enter with my default bindings. So you can see it's the same buffers, same focus, but if you just focus on the left part of the echo area, you can see it's cycling through the layout modes. Stack columns, stack rows, grid, and full screen. Now, one interesting thing about my grid mode, it basically tries to lay things out in a symmetric grid as much as possible. Now, obviously, it can only do that completely if it's dealing with an integer square number of windows, but it will do its best. So I'm pushing things. You can see here the second row doesn't have 3. Now it's even. Now I'm up to 9 different windows, and it's laying them out symmetrically. By the way, I probably don't want to toggle layout modes right now, because the stacked rows and columns modes will crap their pants because they'll try to split things too small, which is something I have to fix. But yeah, so this just works, and I'm gonna pop the windows and try to go back into a more reasonable state. Yeah, so now we're sort of back into a fairly reasonable thing. Hey Tom. Oops. I guess I'll start going, now that you're here, I'll start maybe describing my decide changes. Alright. Okay, Tom, so I think you probably remember the basic roadblock I hit in terms of how to proceed. I had started out using just buffer names as as constituting the managed state, and I think I eventually went to buffer objects rather than just buffer names, but still it was a little too coupled to actual buffers, whereas Windows can contain not only buffers, but they can have a start point, and they can have like a point where the cursor is. So what I came up with is this idea that I have a data type, this def struct wm window, which is basically a deserialized Emacs window, or not deserialized, a serialized window. Right now it doesn't have everything. It doesn't have H-scroll, and it doesn't have all that fringe crap, which I would probably need later. But basically, you can see that I have these serialization functions that take an Emacs window and build a WM window. I also have one that just takes a buffer and just default initializes the point in the start. And then, sort of to deserialize, I have this restore window function, which basically just, unpacks this WM window object and sets the window properties in the current buffer. So what that lets me do is, the other thing I did, and so these WM windows live in a list here, WM windows. I also have this thing, and this is really the key, the insight I had, is that I have this association list, and what it does is it maps from Emacs window pointers for the current layout to the corresponding indices into this WM windows list. So let me just go through an example of how that works. A really simple one, but it's actually one that illustrates why this really works, which is the full screen mode. So when you lay out something in full screen, it resets the layout, and when you reset the layout, it completely kills all existing windows. So all the window pointers that you get from this point on have never been seen before, so they're kind of unique identifiers. Then I take the currently focused window and I restore it, and then see how I set up this A-list. It basically maps from the current Emacs window pointer to the focus, which is an index into this WM Windows list. So the magic then is what I think I call it update windows. This is called at various points. So this thing iterates through all the Emacs windows, and it basically sees if it's a window that I laid out. So if it's one that I generated during my layout phase, it will have an entry in my A list. And if so, I basically update the serialized window properties based on that. So it does a bunch of things. It means that, for example, if I move my cursor around or buffer change, let me show you an example. If I do a buffer change using the built-in Emacs buffer switching to, I don't know, Scratch, then if I full screen, or like suppose I control tab to another buffer, and I then, I go through a bunch of layouts, it still basically remembers that that window I'm managing was switched over to the Scratch buffer. And the reason is, when I switched away, it did an update windows, and it kind of reassociated the updated window properties with my internal WM Windows object. And so in a layout mode where I'm laying out all the windows in WM Windows, basically the A list would have n different entries, right? Because there are actually, n windows laid out on the screen that I laid out. But in this full screen mode, which is, kind of special, but not really, it works with the same principles as everything else. There's only one entry in the A list, right? And so even though the WM Windows list has n entries, the A list actually only has one, because in this layout mode we only actually laid out one window. But what that means is right now I'm using the built-in Emacs splitting. I'm perfectly able to do this, although by default, if I then do any sort of layout change or cycling, it will blow it away. But I'll show you how I deal with that later. So basically, this is super robust, and nothing ever enters my WM Windows list except for a few entry points, and it's all done explicitly. So I don't use any of the display buffer A-list hooking that we talked about yesterday, because I think it's too brittle. I ended up with all these cases where, I would do an auto completion and it would pop up a completions buffer, and I would try to then put it under my management, and it would screw up really badly. So I was screwing up with all these sort of semi-transient windows. So I just decided, no, I'm not going to handle it that way. Things are actually only ever going to enter into my list at a few well-defined points. One point is when you take a snapshot. So given any window configuration, and I'll show you an example, suppose I create a bunch of splits, and I'm just using Emacs's built-in splitting. If I do Control-O, which is bound to WM snapshot, it will take a snapshot in cyclic order of all the windows on the screen and put them under my management. And so I'll do Control-0 now. Boom. So notice those two split windows I created basically are now in my window list, and I can delete them again. But the point is, if you have an arbitrary window configuration created through God knows what method, then basically you have to use WM snapshot, Control-0 on my keyboard, in order to sort of serialize it down to my window manager. But most of the time you don't actually end up doing that. Let me show you an example. Suppose I delete all of the buffers but one. So right now, there's only one buffer being managed, window being managed rather. If I now do any like describe function on, let's say when, Emacs of its own volition pops up a new window because there's no window it can take over. If I now do push, if I do a wm push, as a convention, it will always grab other window to initialize from. So if I do control P plus, the screen didn't change, but actually, as you can see in the bottom, the help buffer now got pushed into my window list. So, you know, it's now under my management. So most of the time, you can either pre-create buffers using push and then populate them, by switching the buffer, or if you have something like describe function, there's a bunch of built-in Emacs functions that like to create a window that's next in the cyclic window ordering. If you do that, you can just press Control P, wm push to push it onto wm windows. So yeah, anyway, it's really, really robust in my opinion. I haven't been. The one thing that's a little brittle right now is actually just the layout modes, like the actual algorithms, because they don't handle, like for example, my stack columns and rows modes can only do 2-column. So eventually the second column will overflow if you pour too many windows into it, but that's easily fixed. I just haven't bothered. Other than that, I'm basically never able to make it break. I've been using it probably for 6 hours now just for productivity, and it's awesome. Like, I'm pretty happy with it actually. I guess I'll go over some other enhancements. Let's see. Other enhancements. Dun, 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 dun. Oh yeah, I have a status bar sort of thing using the echo area. So anytime you do use a command that changes the WM state, it will echo a status. So look at the bottom, the very bottom in the echo area. I'm control tabbing. You can see that it shows that it's currently using the stack columns layout. It has 4 windows under its management. As you can see, they're numbered. And the currently focused one has square brackets as a sort of focus indicator. And you can see if I now do Control plus, it pushes it onto the end of that stack, and if I do minus 2 times, it kicks it off. Let's see. Yeah, so I have, what layout modes do I have? I have full screen from yesterday, but it's now done in a way that's super robust. I have stacked columns from yesterday, stacked rows, which is just sort of the transposition. So if I switch to that, you can see it updates the it updates the display to show that it's now using the stacked rows mode. I can also switch to grid, and grid is basically sort of a symmetric grid mode. Now, obviously, it will only be completely symmetric when you're dealing with a square number of windows. But you can just actually add stuff. So you can look at the bottom. I'm pushing stuff onto the stack. Now there's 6, 7, 8, 9. So it will basically find the most symmetric grid-like layout, and I can pop stuff off the stack again and maybe go back into stacked columns. Anyway, that's pretty much it. It's not a whole lot of code. I actually ended up deleting a bunch of code I had yesterday because once I found sort of the right design, a lot of that wasn't necessary. But I would say it's already pretty complete. Like, honestly, if I handle overflow with these layout modes over here, these stacked layout modes, I think I'm pretty much done, honestly. I think it's almost releasable, except for maybe bug fixes. But honestly, I haven't really found any real bugs at this point. So, pretty happy with it. Probably not gonna stream for much longer, just wanted to get an explanation in, so that, and just a random note, I felt like an idiot yesterday when I was coding on stream, because it's easy enough to just type in code on stream, but like when you actually get to a design hurdle where you just have to meditate for 30 minutes without saying a word, the pressure of having people watching is really a downer. So like pretty much like an hour after I quit the screen yesterday, I got the right idea for how to implement it. So yeah, just a random observation, I guess. Anyway, thanks for watching yesterday and for checking this out today. I'll put up a gist for the latest version of this right now. Alright, see you guys.